Well, it's an honor to be here. They put cookies on the table. If you're looking at me, you might be thinking, this is really distracting for him. So I'm going to move them far away. They're too close. Anyway, it's such a privilege to be with you. I can't tell you. I have to do one personal note. This is my fourth presentation at AMCAP. My first presentation happened 2 months after my daughter was diagnosed with cancer. And she was diagnosed with AML, leukemia. That's the most advanced form. It was really scary. And I had, of course, been accepted to present. And I think I said to my wife at some point, I don't think I'm going to go. And she said, like good wives do, of course you're going to go. And so I came. I felt guilty, but it was a great experience. So AMCAP every year is a bit of a reminder. We're now 4 years into remission, and one more year, and they say she'll be less than 5% relapse rate. So we're, right? And she came with us, but her best friend picked her up at the airport, and she's not interested in what we're doing here. So I'm grateful for that. My wife came today, and I don't know why it is, but it makes me so much more nervous for my wife to be here. I think at least for me and for men, we really want to look awesome to our wives. And if I screw up, boy, it's bad news. There's a bit of a history to today's presentation. And ironically, the history rooted in a gentleman came up to me and said, hey, I have my daughter with me, and your bio, he read my bio, and the bio says the word sex in it a lot, and is this going to be appropriate? I said, yes. And to my own relief, I thought, oh, I'm not presenting anything about sex. So I'm grateful to do this. But that is because as my clinical career has progressed, I have become completely convinced in particularly theories around the attachment model, attachment theory, because for me and my experience and my study, it is the most consistent model with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so whenever I hear of an approach that I'm not sure about, I compare it back and look at what the best researchers in the field are talking about relative to attachment theory and these particular issues, whether it's anxiety or depression or addiction or relationship repair. Understanding attachment structures is critical. And my goal today is to identify a couple of objectives. I want to recognize and describe the differences between stress states and joy states, that they're psychobiologic. They're both physical and emotional. We want to identify the key implicit instinctual behaviors of attachment and connection, and identify the key explicit interactive behaviors for building and repairing attachment. And we want to articulate the differences between and the developing relationship between co-regulation and auto-regulation. Now, those are critical points I want to talk about. So I want to say initially, none of this is good ideas by Dan Oakes. I overstate that a little bit because I want to introduce you to some of the researchers that I believe do the most pristine work and most inform not just my clinical mindset, but the heart with which we do this work. And I have, of course, taken some of their work and added some good ideas by Dan Oakes only in how I present it. And my hope is that it's inspirational to you and that it affects your understanding. Because I think the things I'm talking about aren't the things you're going to go sit down and teach your clients. You're going to be paying attention to them implicitly. You're going to find teaching methods explicitly to help progress the work. So here's my first introduction. This is Dr. Bruce Perry. Dr. Perry, I have it in small print down there, and I'm so blind I can hardly read it for myself, but he runs in Texas, he runs a child trauma clinic there. But he would say he's a neurobiologist, he's an MD from school in Chicago. But I've been watching him, listening to his work, and I tell you, it's groundbreaking stuff. But here's the quote that sums up, and we're going to read this a couple of times during our presentation today. Our brain is designed to promote relationships. Specific parts of the human brain respond to emotional cues, such as facial expressions, touch, scent, and more important, allows us to get pleasure from positive human interactions. Those systems in the brain that mediate pleasure appear to be closely connected to the systems that mediate emotional relationships. And he said, I've heard him say, this quote is that they're somehow connected. He said they're the exact same structures. They're the same structures in the brain that mediate pleasure and mediate relationship. So that's informing to us. So think about this for a second. Who knows what colostrum is? Right? And we know that initial milk that the mother gives is high in what? Fat and sugar. Right? And why? Just to reward the baby? Our body has produced a way to classically condition the relationship between pleasure and closeness. Because how do we feed a baby? We feed the baby in our arms, at mother's breast, or with a bottle, right? That happens the day we're born. We come out of the womb screaming, and they clean the baby off, they hand the baby to mom, and what's the baby do? Stop screaming. And why is that? There is an intense neurologic, biologic structure in place to help this felt sense of closeness and connection. It is not just the Valentine's Day crush, and it's not in awareness, because we know the baby is not saying, well, hello, mother, it's good to see you again. Right? It is deeply unconscious, and it involves the whole brain. And so that pleasure is of equaling relationship very much in the first years of our life. And it creates joy states, not just in the baby, but in the parent as well. And those joy states are often most associated with relationships through the developmental process of our lives. Kids playing, great example, the way they laugh, the way they interact with each other. They're so innocent and accepting, and kids are just in joy. I remember a particular moment. We took all of our kids to Hawaii, and we were waiting at a little harbor where we were going to do one of those scuba trips, and we're all sitting on the fence waiting. And the kids, our kids, us, were laughing, we're talking, and we made videos of this little moment. To this day, when we see those videos, we're like, oh, stop, let's watch this 20 times. Because we had so much pleasure that came from what? Interaction. Is something happening there? Okay.
There's lost signal.
Okay. But all through the timeline, this is effective. And we're going to revisit this. Now, Dr. Perry has another statement. The brain is a conservative organ. It does not like to be surprised. All unknown or unfamiliar environmental cues are judged to be threatening until proven otherwise. Novel stimulus focuses attention, increases arousal, and induces an alarm response until they can be proven neutral or safe. So he's talking very distinctly about two states of the brain. Our brain is designed for closeness, and it mediates pleasure and connection and relationship. And our brain is weary and cautious. And it's looking at the world, attempting to prove what is safe. Look at the facial expression. And at a minimum, it's just evaluating external stimulus, anticipating threat. I have a great story about threat. My wife and I moved into a house in Mesa, Arizona, and one night we had a little room, a bedroom that had a door into the master. It was a bedroom, but it had a door in the master, and so we made a nursery. We put the baby in there. You know what story I'm telling? And I had walked into the nursery and walked out, and I heard the screen coming off the window. And I'm like, oh, this is the moment. And I'm telling my wife, this is it. Somebody's coming in the window. And I just started having this vision. I'm going to pull the blinds back, and I'm going to punch right through the glass. I'm going to hit him. I'm going to knock him down, I'm going to scream at him. And I get over by the window, and my senses are heightened. I'm in an aroused state. I sense a threat, terrified, and I start to pull the blind up to respond, and I yank the blind up, and there's our cat on the screen, like, you know how a cat is like, and it's making an awful noise. And of course, I perceived it initially as a threat. And that's what we do. We're always evaluating what those threats are. Sometimes those evaluations are contemplative and focused, and other times they're in the outside of the window of tolerance and we're freaking out. And sometimes they're very low threats, low in intensity. We'll talk more about that. Like depression or sadness or loneliness is a threat to our relational brain. And it starts to pull away and shut down. So our brain, in general, is living in two states. We live in these joy states that have a lot to do with relational joy and pleasure. And don't get me wrong, I'm using that word pleasure liberally, because it is the most wonderful feeling to feel connected. And then in these evaluative states of stress, of dysregulation. And so our brain is making this subtle awareness, and it's associating safety with love, and love with safety. And it's associating fear with danger, and danger with fear. You know that phrase that's well known, it takes a village? Well, of course it takes a village, because it takes a mother, it takes a family, it takes a group of people to really help us feel safe. And our brain, the day it's born, knows. It knows, well, get a phone call during a presentation. It knows that if I get kicked out of my relationship with my mother or my family or the village, my brain knows that is dangerous. He doesn't have to learn that. And the skin, the senses know. If I'm out here too long, I'm likely to get eaten. I'm likely to get lost, to get hurt. And that comes instinctually. Now I want to make a second introduction. This is Dr. Alan Shore. Dr. Shore is a clinical scientist at UCLA Center for Cultural Brain Development, UCLA Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences. This 3 minutes, I'm going to play this tape for you, has been the most profound, and I'm going to use a Mormon word, and I'm calling it Mormon just so you, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, okay, it's the best psychological doctrine I've ever heard, and it is a guiding rudder to my work. I can't even cite it. It's a YouTube video. I can't even cite it. Somebody posted it, and clearly he did it for some mental health organization, but they didn't say who they were. But I've clipped up the most important parts, and I will restart it until the sound works. I want to make sure it works.
The understanding now is the fundamental nature of emotions in all human interactions. Emotions tell us what is meaningful, what is important. They're also the integration of the mind and the body, because emotions, by definition, psychobiological, the body's reaction, etc. Emotions are also at the heart of how we perceive something as being meaningful. Something is meaningful because an emotional response within us marks that. The body is marking that. So that being the case, emotional development is even earlier than cognitive and intellectual development. This essentially is the way that our bodies react to stressors in the environment. Now, there are also cognitive pieces to these emotions, but essentially we're looking at a fundamental reaction of the brain, mind, body to changes in the environment, to changes that are either stressful or non-stressful. That being the case, emotions can either be positive or negative, but essentially these are adaptive reactions. And again, when they are out of bounds, when they are highly dysregulated, they lose an adaptive function and they interfere with behavior rather than facilitate behavior. That being the case, let me just say that the idea that negative emotions are bad and positive emotions are good is not true. It is important for us to be able to learn how to cope with stress, and the ability to experience a negative emotion such as fear or shame is extremely adaptive. It's part of what tells us to move away from organisms. It's part of also moral development. So I just wanted to point out it's not so much positives are good and negative or bad as the difference between regulated and dysregulated. And when you're talking about dysregulation, you're talking about intensity of emotion, either extremely highly intense or very low in intensity. These are the ones that are problematic. Very low intensity in depression and loss, etc. Very high intensity in, let's say, terror. The capacity for emotions clearly is important for survival skills and for the adaptive capacity of all human beings. We're now realizing that even more than the ability to rationally, logically think through life, it's these emotional intuitions, it's the emotional capacities that really are the key that allow us to move through the world and to interact with other human beings, because essentially we are doing more than just communicating with each other by language. We're also communicating with each other non-verbally through these emotional communications, through face, gesture, tone of voice. These are always going on underneath the language, and these are more critical actually for our ability to make contact with other human beings. Someone who's always looking to someone else to regulate their state but cannot auto-regulate their state is problematic. And then in the most serious disorders, you have someone when they're under stress who can neither auto-regulate their own stress nor interactively regulate stress. And now we're looking at severe problems of chronic stress.
However, listen closely.
Chronic stress essentially is stress dysregulation. But I want to point out again, the major way that human beings regulate these states, regulate our own internal homeostasis, regulate our body states, is by connecting with other human beings.
That's last phrase, right? Embodies the nature of what I want you to take from this. The way human beings regulate stress is through connection with other human beings. And he's using that word stress broadly. I want to put into action some of the things that he talked about, and I want to systematize them and try to show you a construct that has been most useful for me. Here's the big takeaway from Dr. Shore. It's now established. Now, he didn't say this. This is a separate quote. But what do you think it means when a guy like Shore, he's a researcher, he is a brain researcher, says the phrase, it is now established.
Empirical.
It's empirical. It means what? We've done the studies over and over and over with the same results. Now, I want to juxtapose when a prophet gets up and says, "Thus saith the Lord." What do we know in our culture? We feel something distinct, right? There's deep credibility spiritually. When a guy like Al Shore, I'm not really comparing the two, but I am, just for a metaphor, says, "It is now established." Am I overemphasizing enough for you? It's now established emotions are the highest order of direct expression of bioregulation in complex organisms. That's us. We're complex organisms. That the maturation of neural mechanisms involved in self-regulation is experience dependent. He's saying that because of the old scientists who used to say you're either born one way, it's nature, nurture, one or the two. And Shore says it's not binary. It's both. And especially they are experience dependent, and that these critical affective experiences are embedded in the attachment relationship. Here's my supposition. Here's my takeaway. Follow me. We live in a constant state of stress. And in this idea, what I mean and what these researchers mean is that stress motivates every single behavior. To this extent, if I'm thirsty, I get a drink. If I'm cold, I get a blanket. If I'm tired, I take a nap. But there's always a stressor, and most of the time in our mature life, we know exactly how to respond to the stressor. So stress motivates every behavior. But for humans, those stressors filter through emotion. And as I've tried to establish, what the neurologists tell us is there's really only two emotions. There's fear. And what is fear? Our neurologic sense and search to determine what's safe or not. That's what I mean by that. and there's love. And by love, I mean very specific positive emotions. All positive emotions, they say, look the same as love in the brain. When they do PEC scans and they're asking people questions about the person they love, like if I have gratitude, I have to have love first. If I have jealousy, I have to have fear first. Right, so we're talking about a neurologic state. It's not just language. And therefore, if my stressors filter through love, or that loving brain state or a joy state, I'm wanting to make sure you know exactly what I mean by that, it will produce positive behavior, like cooperation, like compliance, like giving, reciprocity, helpful, motivation, and kindness. And we could go on and on about what kind of behaviors joy states help us regulate. Right? Likewise, fear produces negative behavior, like lying or yelling or indulgence, aggression, defiance, obstinance, and arguing. So there is a brain-based process of how we move and escalate from emotional states into behavior. And if you're familiar with, there's so many approaches that utilize this model, like EFT, for example, how couples go up and down that state is about how difficult emotions, perceptions of my partner, misinterpreted, goes to negative behavior. Maurice just did a great presentation on that in the previous session. But I'm wanting to break that down into smaller and smaller chunks so it makes more and more sense. So that love means love-based feelings. Happy, joyful, glad, excited, proud, and confident. And the emotion then is a regulating emotion. It regulates us. It helps us be calm. And the behavior is adaptive. So things that are adaptive or maladaptive end up being the behavior, and regulation is talking about the emotion. And the result is calm mind, calm body, and heart. That's what it feels like. It changes our neurologic moment. Likewise, and maybe more importantly to understand, is that fear and fear-based feelings like anger, hostility, shame, frustrated, envious, jealous, and scared often become dysregulated. Now, not all fear, and like Alan Short said, not all fear is dysregulated. Because if a bear comes through this door, we're all going to go into fear that's highly adaptive. What would we do? We're all going to go through those doors really quickly, right? But often those fear-based emotions represent as dysregulated. We feel chaotic or excessively rigid in them, and the behaviors can become maladaptive. Here's the critical point. If, as clinicians, as anybody that's ever been in a relationship ever, what we need to remember is that all negative behavior comes from fear. We've got to play the chess game. And here's why this is so important. Imagine, let's take a parenting moment. I'm going to totally make one up that probably happened in my life. But let's pretend my daughter won't go to bed. And she's making noise, and we have friends over, and it's late, and she should have been in bed a half an hour ago, and she's interrupting the card game we're playing, which is not, I don't like playing games anyway, but let's say this is happening. And so she's noisy, she's yelling, and I run upstairs, and I say, "That's it, young lady. I'm sick of you not going to bed. You go to bed right now." Well, my angry response is going to do what to her fear? Fear up or fear down? Up. And so I'm going to get more of what? Negative behavior, right? She says, "Well, I think there's a monster in the closet." No monster in the closet. I can get her, put her in the closet. See, no monster. Now fear way up, right? But I'm exaggerating to make this point that sometimes we respond to our spouses or our children or to people we work with or the customer service agent on the phone in a way that's going to guarantee dysregulation back. Question?
Appropriate?
Sure.
I'm not a counselor, just up front. I'm a friend of a counselor.
Sure.
I'm a rabbi. I'm wondering the role, you're saying behavior is regulated, not emotion. Can emotion be regulated through thought?
Sure. Yes, it absolutely can. The point I'm trying to make my presentation is explicitly that it's regulated primarily by relational behavior. And I'm going to get more concise. Thank you, though. I appreciate the question. That means I'm setting you up exactly where I'm wanting you to go. So thank you. Thank you. So here's the question. Here's this little stress model that I've presented. This particular is not Good Ideas by Dan Oakes. There's a great book out there. I failed to make a slide for it. Beyond Consequences, Logic, and Control. If you've ever heard of this book, fantastic book. It was written for kids with reactive attachment disorder, so great researchers that use a model like this. But 20 years after that book's been written, I always say every kid's reactive attachment. They're all on screens too much, and most of the parents. And they all need help reconnecting. Beyond Consequences, Logic, and Control. There's two authors. One is Howard Post. I can't remember the name of the other one. What's that? Oh, thank you very much. Okay, so the question is, how do we regulate fear to love? How do we shift it in ourselves and in others? And hopefully I've done my job that you sense the setup that's coming, because that principle, what we do to do that, is an attachment experience. So I'm going to restate Dr. Perry's comment with now red emphasis on two other phrases than I did in the first one. Specific parts of the human brain respond to emotional cues, such as facial expression, touch, scent, and more important, allow us to get pleasure from positive human interactions. These systems in the brain that mediate pleasure appear to be closely connected to the systems that mediate emotional relationship. So, facial expression and tone mediate that shift. You want to activate the pleasure center of somebody's brain, their relational center. We have to use these other mechanisms. And here, now this is how I've conceptualized. Now here's Good Ideas by Dan Oakes. And this is, as I've listened to Alan Shore and Bruce Perry and others, I have deduced some key principles that are implicit principles, meaning we all do them even when we don't know that we're doing them. We're doing them very, very young, pre-verbal, and we do them our whole life till the day we die. And here's what those are. Eye contact. Smile. Touch. Tone. Movement and gesture. And sugar. See, now I can do an object lesson. I'm going to open this right up, eat this cookie, and I'll be in a joy state right now. But let me tell you what. If you have a 13-year-old boy that is driving you crazy, go get him, put him in your car, drive to Circle K, and say, hey, let's go get a candy bar. What's your favorite candy bar? You go in, you each get a candy bar, you come back in the car and you eat your candy bar. And then you say, you know what? I love you. And we haven't been getting along too much, right? Now what am I doing? Am I being manipulative? Well, is the mother manipulative when her colostrum goes right into that baby that's screaming? And what's the baby do? The baby calms down. Now, I know you're thinking, you're looking at me going, I think Dan's used that strategy a little too much. But let's walk through that. Let's just walk through it a little bit. Think about the day you get your babies. You bring them home. That eye contact is not even a good description of what we do. It's gazing, right? And we're enamored. We are falling in love with that baby. We're like, as grandparents, we're like, this is the cutest baby I've ever seen. We're like, my wife would be like, okay, let's try to erase our bias. No, it's so cute, right? We stay biased, but you know what that's like. And the baby gazes back. Their eyes are so big, right? And they're looking at you, and we smile, and we tickle, and we touch, we smile, and within a few months, they're smiling back. These behaviors are reciprocal. Due to mirror neurons and other things I couldn't even begin to explain to you, means that when we look, we get a gaze back. And the dendritic growth in the baby's brain during these attachment moments is on fire. It's going crazy. And the touch, we tickle them, wipe them, clean them. We touch them like crazy. We jiggle their cheeks. I took a slow motion video of my granddaughter and I flicked her cheek and I'm like, that is the best thing. And for some reason, I'm elated by that movement and the smile, right? My brain is freaking out. And they reach and grab us. That same grandbaby grabs my glasses every time I pick her up, right off my face. Because she's reaching to the part of my face that she instinctually recognizes. And she's smiling. And I think she's smiling because she wants to destroy my glasses. But she's smiling because she knows that she's cared for. Tone and movement. Our kids are completely dependent on us at the beginning of their life for where they go and what they do. I remember our first daughter had a hard time sleeping, and we would put her in her car seat, and we'd sit her on top of the washer, and we'd turn on the spin cycle and stand there with her, because the movement and the sound of our voice and our breathing, my hunches, all of that helped her go to sleep, right? And then sugar. What's that? Right? Still in my house. And sugar. What do we do to a crying baby? We feed it, right? What do we do when we get together as a big family? What do? We eat. What do you do at the end of a date? Go get ice cream. And now watch how this sugar metaphor transition. You go from the ice cream parlor at the end of the date to the doorstep. And what do you do at the doorstep? A new kind of sugar, right? It is sweet, right? I already said when we get together as a family, we eat. So how else do we regulate? When these attachment structures, neurologically and unconsciously, build and we get used to them, something very specific kicks in inside of us. And that is a thing the researchers call the nurturing instinct. And I'm going to describe it like it's a math equation. It is nothing like a math equation. But it literally means that I can give a positive to a negative. That when the person in my relational experience in front of me is giving me negative, I can give it a positive. Now, what's the basic version of that? What do we do to a crying baby? We don't scream at it. Now, that seems obvious, doesn't it? Maybe it's obvious with a 4-year-old. If I walk in and my 4-year-old is throwing a complete fit, maybe I'm going, hey, what's wrong, buddy? I don't understand. But when it's my 14-year-old, I'm like, look, man, you better get off the floor. I'm going to kick your butt. Right? Fear up. Right? Our ability to be nurturers is in all of us. We know that it's divinely given to women, right? Or else why would they put up with us, right? But we all have it. And it's very simple. There's the crying baby. The mother or the daughter or the uncle or the dad, we pick that baby up and we instantly do this. We start moving. We put our cheek against theirs. We pat them on their back. And I can remember after we had our 5 kids, if I was standing in church somewhere, I realized I'm still doing this. What am I doing? I don't have a baby anymore. But I think unconscious self-soothing, right? Absolutely. So that co-regulation, that nurturing instinct, another word for that in the research is co-regulation. I'm going to join somebody's suffering, and I'm going to give to that suffering. Who is the quintessential co-regulator? Right. Right? I'm going to show you another one that's a little famous.
Tom Hammond and Craig Masbach back at
You'll recognize
Olympic
this.
Stadium in Barcelona, coming up to the men's 400-meter semifinals. Here are the lane assignments. Steve Lewis in lane 3. Top 4 to Wednesday's final. Steve Lewis in lane 3. Roberto Hernandez out quickly in 4. Now down the backstretch.
Ismail on the left of the screen is running very, very quickly. And inside of
Watch.
Lewis, Sunday Bada of Nigeria.
Can you imagine spending your whole life preparing for
Great
one
Britain
day
has pulled up with an injury. Redmond is out.
and for it to go
Derek
so
Redmond,
wrong?
the British record holder, and an important member of that British
How many of you have seen this video?
4x400-meter relay team, as he doesn't want anybody to help him.
It'll be Lewis to win in 44.50.
So he's going to auto-regulate. I'm going to finish on my own.
Look at this.
And then
He's
something
going to
happens.
try to finish his semifinal race.
This is auto-regulation, but why does he do this so well?
The British have a
Because he was
certain
raised by
tradition
somebody.
of running, which you have to respect.
A bizarre finish to this first semifinal in the men's 400 meters. Derek Redmond of Great Britain pulled up
Look,
with an injury.
who do you think that
halfway
is?
down the back stretch. He's fighting off those trying to help him to finish the race in his lane.
Here's my
Now
thing.
the pain too much.
Watch. Other people try to come help. Watch what Dad does. Get away from us, man! I am co-regulating my child. That's love. You know? That's love.
The applause swelling throughout Olympic Stadium.
Made me
As
think of a
Redmond,
moment my brother
with
tells me
assistance
about.
this time,
My brother
approaches
told me
the
a story
finish
that
line he had
went
wanted
through
so
BYU and
desperately to
failed
reach.
out, got in trouble, and did some things he shouldn't. And he came home. And he thought for sure my dad was going to.
That
Hate it.
is the Olympic spirit.
He said, I never forget the day I got to the door. My dad was at the door. He said to me, whatever the trouble is, we'll get through it together. And my dad is not a soft guy. But his nurturing instinct kicked in. And he loved. Now, how else do we regulate from fear to love? The other is explicit principles of attachment. I think I've got... I think I accidentally deleted the slide that introduced you to Dan Hughes. So the author of these principles is a psychologist out of Maine who is an attachment researcher, spent his career working with detached kids and helping them reattach to foster parents, to adopted parents. He is a genius. And his research, these are not just the tools, but these explicit principles of attachment, what is my word for them, is because we generate them consciously, right? And the problem with them is that they have to be conscious, because the problem is sometimes we don't do it because we're lazy or emotionally unaware or whatever. But it is a great acronym of PLACE. Now, he now uses the term PACE, and so he leaves the L out, but he used to use the L. I liked it better, so I'm going to stay with his old stuff. But here's what these explicit principles of attachment. And I love his stuff. He's got great books. And so I'm sad that I didn't introduce him effectively. I can't find that slide. P is for playfulness. L is for love, as in expressions of. How many ways can you say I love you? Right? I'll give you one. My dad, who I've already told you one story about, when I was a little kid, we lived down the country in Missouri, Liberty, Missouri. It's a unique city for people that are in this conference. We lived in Liberty, out in the country. Our closest neighbor was about a half mile away, and they were the Lauders. They had a bunch of boys. Those boys would come over, my brothers, and they would all play and do stuff. And my dad would come home and say, "You Lauder boys, get home." Lauder boys would head out the door, go home. And then he'd look at me and say, "Hey, you're a Lauder boy, get home." I'd be like, "No, fear state. Dad, no, I'm your son, I belong here." No, you, Lauder boy, get home." I'd be like, what? And I would say, "Dad, no." And I was just at the point of tears. He would say, "I'm teasing you, come here." And I'd walk over to him, he'd pull me in really tight, and he'd say, "No, I know, you belong to me." So he didn't say the word "I love you." That was an expression of love I have remembered my whole life. I remember it at other times when he's got his work boot and he's kicking me in the butt. I hang on to that one. But expressions of love, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. These we have to very intentionally generate. We have to be aware. We have to seek those connected moments. He says playfulness is the fastest way to reconnect, get your brains talking. And I had this standard of practice when I was a dad. I'm still a dad, but when my kids were little is what I mean. If they were crying or fussing about something I thought was not appropriate for them to be doing that, instead of yelling at them, I did my share of that too. I just decided I'm going to tickle them every time they do this. And they would start out screaming angry at me, and they would end laughing and wrestling with me. To this day, my boy is 6'2" and way bigger than me, but I always remind him that we used to do this 10-mile drive to church, and he would ask me to tickle him. And he would scoot away from me, and I'd reach and tickle him, and he'd laugh and beg me to stop, and I'd stop. He'd be like, "Don't stop. And then a few minutes later, he'd be like, "Do it again, Dad. Do it again." Right? Now, when we live in a life that's awash in implicit and explicit principles of connection, and not even awash, even Dan Siegel, who I didn't quote today, says that the best parents are tuning to the kids only 30% of the time. So he says that to reassure people. You don't have to be perfect. We know you're not going to pay attention to your kid all the time, right? The best parents are tuning 30% of the time, right? But when we live in a place where it feels safe, we're not in those stress states, then we shift from co-regulation into auto-regulation. And why is auto-regulation possible? Why can we go be ourselves and climb a mountain and get that job and get that master's degree? It's not because we're independent. It's because we know completely how safe it feels to be connected. And we feel safe to go because if I make a mistake, I know exactly where to go. I'm not alone out there. That's why I can go do hard things. It's because I feel safe to be where I'm going. And that is what that looks like. I've got this, right? Now, maybe the picture's a little young for when we tend to get it in our lives. I co-regulated this morning. I'm here with coworkers, my wife, and we're in this Maurice's, and I'm starting to get nervous. It's like 15 minutes away, and my buddy's like, "You want me to scratch your back? You want me to rub you?" And they're just assuring me. They're telling me, "You're gonna be great. You're gonna be great." But I'm so nervous. Auto-regulate. We turn. Can you imagine what it would feel like to be in a relationship where you can't turn at all? That's scary stuff. And our brain doesn't like it. So let's review quickly. some key components of this presentation. Yes?
I just have a question.
Yes?
Why did he take the love out of the formula?
I don't know exactly. I think it's because he does it with lots of different groups of people. And I think it's because in some scenarios, they're regulating through playfulness, but it's not like, oh, I love you. There's some scenarios where that's not.
Don't you think they're all expressions of love?
They are, right? But the idea of the felt sense in my skin and my smell and the senses that Alan Short says, this stuff is more vital than verbal communication and was going on long before verbal, and we were doing it before we could talk. We're learning to interact in these ways before we can ever speak. So here's these steps to relational regulation. 1, remember, stress is constant. We may not be aware of it, but I get up this morning, my wife stays in bed, she goes to the temple. By the way, she came in and sat next to me and said, I got to be a witness this morning. That was so cool. And if you're not a member, you don't know what that means, ask a friend that's a member. They'll tell you what that means. Stress is constant. Our brain is always going to be aware. Right? And that's not a maladaptive anything. That's our natural state. And there are really only 2 emotions, fear and love. And we're not talking traditional versions of fear. We're talking about this global neurologic fear and love. Right? There's really only 2 of those. And that all negative behaviors come from fear. 4, we regulate fear to love with implicit and explicit attachment behaviors. 5, attachment grows into a nurturing instinct and sets up co-regulation. And explicit attachment behavior promotes growth into auto-regulation. Allows us to move forward and take those risks. The irony is, when we get into an auto-regulated state, guess what we do? We intentionally seek stress. I'm going to go climb that mountain. My wife said to me, I'm going to run, this was several years ago, 4K, 10K. I'm going to run it. See, I don't even know the number. That's all fear for me, right? I'm going to run a 10K. And I'm like, you go, girl. Right? I always tell her, we're going to get to the celestial kingdom, and I'll be in a little red cart, and you'll be pulling me along. Right? But we seek out stressful things. I'm going to get that master's degree. I'm going to start going to the gym. I'm going to do that. We seek stressful states. There's something about challenge that we know we're going to grow. Now, if you want my PowerPoint, I'm not done, but if you want my PowerPoint, email me and let me know. I'd love Maurice's technology with the text. That was awesome. Want to figure? What's that? What? There we go. Just take a picture. There's my email. Email me. I'll gladly send you a copy. Yes. Yes.
I'm wondering, everything you have taught is extremely valuable and foundational. I'm wondering about the role of the individual. To play on your last word, auto-regulation in terms of self.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, I don't think the relational can truly blossom unless there's also that auto in a literal sense of self. To regulate ourselves, to have that, we call in Judaism more like self-isolating, self-reflecting, self-engaging, self-expanding, self-awareness, self-growth.
I completely agree, and I think what I would say is auto-regulation, as we mature, it becomes our foundation of self. But that foundation of self lives with the history and unconsciousness of deep connectedness. Because we know...
Or broken connections, but can another person, can it all focus on relational? I think there has to be an individual.
I completely agree. I do.
To help the relations.
Yes, absolutely. And we grow as individuals. And I think spirituality really helps us with
I
that,
was
right?
going to ask about repentance, but I figured that was way off.
Well, I'm going to go there a little bit.
But also, having said that, I think that if you keep creative, I think that's why the relationship with the client, that therapeutic alliance, creates safe space where
Yes.
they can go into
Absolutely.
regulate as well.
So one of the quotes Alan Shore says, it's in that video that I didn't play. He says at the very beginning, there's a revolution of emotion in psychology, and it is at the core of psychotherapeutic change. It's at the core of it. If you don't know how to co-regulate, right? If you can't do that, you're not going to create the change you hope. Now, I'm going to do a metaphor. This is a metaphor. I want you to know, whether you are a religious person or not, Mother Nature and or God knows these principles. Absolute. And if you're a member of our church, consider the following. And he saw God face to face, and he talked with him. The glory of God was upon Moses. And when Jesus had spoken these words, he came again unto the disciples, and behold, they did pray steadfastly without ceasing it unto him, and he did smile upon them. And they brought young children to him, that he should touch them. And his disciples rebuked those that brought them. And it came to pass that when Jesus had made an end of these things, he touched with his hand the disciples whom he had chosen, one by one. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. We think metaphoric. I don't know. I know when I served as a bishop once, we were up at a young men's encampment, and one of the boys that was there was ready for his interview to become a priest. And I said, hey, Josh, let's do that interview while we're here. He said, okay, Bishop. And we went out to the dirt road that circled the whole camp, and we walked that circle twice, and we had that interview. And I'll tell you, I've been a stake president now for 4 years. I have done hundreds of interviews. How many do you think I remember? Very few, but that one I remember. Why? Because we walked together, shoulder to shoulder. We talked about personal, wonderful things. And every time I see him, we smile, hug. And he saw the Lord, and he walked with him, and was before his face continually. How sweet are the words unto my taste, yea, sweeter than honey to my mouth. The words of who? And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire, a still, small voice. Now you know what scripture is going to come next? Do you? You don't know right away? And it came to pass that I did go forth and partake of the fruit thereof. And behold, that it was most sweet, above all that I had ever before tasted. And behold, that fruit thereof was white to exceed the whiteness that I had ever seen. Now, if I were to go back through all of those, which I won't, but they're in this list, and I'll send you this if you email me. What ordinance of the gospel? What are the function of ordinances in the covenant path? It is literally for God to touch us and talk to us. These attachment principles are divine. He designed us, he created us to be like him. I can't read mine. But think about eye contact. Where do we have what ordinance do we have eye contact in? Ceiling. Right? And when can we smile? Ceiling. When does touch happen? What ordinances have touch in it? All of them? Baptism, blessings, ordinations, confirmation, initiatory, endowment, sealing, tone. All of them. Any of them that have spoken word. Right? Movement. Baptism, sacrament, initiatory, endowment. Movement. sugar and nutrition, the sacrament. And anytime the Spirit of God is present in our heart. Now, I say those as a metaphor and as an explicit comparison to what it is, the work the Lord does and the work that we do. I'm so grateful to share these principles with you as I want to bear my testimony. I don't know if that's appropriate. I don't know how to end without saying in the name of Jesus Christ. That's okay with you?
Maybe I can also bless going into lunch.
Oh,
That's
that's
perfect. That's perfect.
We're all going to go eat together as a group. And we're going to feel so connected. Thank you for coming today. I appreciate it.